The photo that wasn't supposed to exist. 3 weeks after my daughter's wedding, a stranger's face showed up in the photographer's crowd shots, standing at the edge of the reception, watching the groom like she already knew something the rest of us didn't. By the time I found out who she was, my daughter had already signed papers she didn't understand. And the man she married had done this before, more than once. My name is Robert Callahan. Everyone calls me Bob. I'm 58, retired now, but for 26 years, I worked as a forensic accountant chasing bank fraud cases out of Denver, Colorado. You spend that long looking for the gap between what people say and what the numbers show, and it changes how you watch a man shake your hand. My daughter Emily married Derek Voss on a Saturday in May at a vineyard venue in Boulder County. My wife Diane and I paid for most of it. Derek ran a wealth advisory firm out of Cherry Creek. Confident, well-dressed, the kind of man who remembers your coffee order. He proposed after 11 months. Emily called us crying, the good kind of crying. And I let myself be happy for almost 2 months before the old instinct started tapping on the back of my skull. I didn't listen. That was my first mistake. Derek's mother, Patricia Voss, moved through the reception like she owned the room, greeting people with a warmth that never reached her eyes. I noticed and dismissed it. We'd hired a photographer named Marcus Webb, quiet, careful, easy to work with. So when he called my cell 4 weeks after the wedding, I picked up without thinking twice. "Mr. Callahan," he said, voice careful, like a man who'd been sitting with something too long. "There's a woman in several of the reception frames. She's not on your guest list, and she's not looking at the party. She's looking at Derek." Diane saw my face and set her coffee down without a word. I told her Marcus had found something in the photos. She asked to come. I told her he'd only asked for me. She nodded slowly and told me to call the second I left. I drove to Lafayette with the radio off. Marcus's studio light was already on, like he'd been watching for headlights. He didn't say much, just walked me to a laptop already open to a wide reception shot. Near the back, half turned from the camera, a woman in a dark green dress stood holding a drink she wasn't drinking, watching my new son-in-law with an expression that had nothing celebratory in it at all. I didn't know it yet, but that woman had been trying to reach my daughter for 7 months, and what she was about to tell me wasn't just about a wedding. It was about a man who'd learned exactly how to disappear with someone else's future and make it look like love the whole way through. I sat down across from Marcus, and he turned the laptop toward me instead of explaining right away. That's the thing about people who've spent years being careful. They show you the evidence before they let themselves say the conclusion out loud. "I wasn't looking for anything," Marcus said. "I was just culling frames for the album." But her face kept showing up in the background. 3 different times, always angled toward Derek, never toward Emily. So I ran her through a reverse image search. I know how that sounds, but something about her didn't sit right. He scrolled to a second photo. Different lighting, different venue, a banner behind a small crowd that read, "Congratulations, Rachel and Derek." My chest went tight in a way I hadn't felt since my worst years reviewing fraud files. "Her name is Rachel Doyle," Marcus said. "That photo's from a public wedding gallery. A photographer in Fort Collins posted it 3 years ago." He didn't need to say the rest. I was already doing the math myself. "Same groom," I said. My voice came out flatter than I meant it to. "Same groom," Marcus said. "Different bride. Different last name on the invitation." I checked. There's no marriage license search that comes up easy for a Derek Voss in Larimer County from that year. But the man in this photo is your son-in-law. I'd bet my studio on it. I asked if he had more. He said he'd pulled every frame that included the woman in the green dress. 11 in total, and in most of them she was staying at the edges, arriving late, leaving before the toasts. Like someone who'd come to confirm something rather than celebrate it. "Send me everything," I told him. "Every photo. Don't post the gallery yet. Don't mention this to anyone, especially not Emily." "Of course," he said. I drove home in silence and sat in my truck, in the driveway for almost 10 minutes before I went inside. Diane was waiting at the kitchen table when I walked in, and she didn't ask what happened. She just poured 2 cups of coffee and waited. The way she's done for 31 years when she already knows. The answer is going to be bad. "Talk to me, Bob," she finally said. I told her everything. The woman in the photos, the other wedding banner, the name Rachel Doyle. Diane's hands went still around her coffee cup, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. Because we both understood exactly what this might mean for our daughter's marriage, and neither of us had any idea yet how much worse it actually was. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Diane in the dark and listened to her breathing and thought about Emily, asleep right now in the Denver townhouse she shared with Derek, a man whose name apparently belonged to more than one wedding banner. Diane wanted to act immediately. That's her nature, and I don't fault her for it. But I asked her for 1 week before we told Emily anything, because the moment you tip your hand, you lose whatever advantage you have. She agreed reluctantly and made me promise I wasn't protecting Derek by waiting. I wasn't. I was protecting the truth long enough to actually find it. The next morning, I called an old colleague, Sam Torres, who still had access to public records databases through his current job at a title insurance company. We'd worked fraud cases together for 9 years before I retired. And if there was one man who could run a name through every county database in Colorado without raising flags, it was Sam. I gave him what I had: Rachel Doyle, a wedding photo from 3 years ago near Fort Collins, Derek Voss. Sam whistled low over the phone the way he always does when something smells wrong. "Give me 2 days," he said. While I waited, I asked Marcus to send everything he had, 11 photographs of the woman in green. In most of them, she stayed at the edges of the frame, but in one taken during the first dance, she was standing closer to the floor than anywhere else, watching Emily and Derek with an expression I couldn't fully name. Not anger exactly. Something closer to recognition, like she was watching a scene she'd already lived through once before. Sam called back on the 3rd day, and what he found didn't match what Marcus had guessed. There was no completed marriage license for Derek Voss and Rachel Doyle. Instead, Sam found something stranger. A civil case filed in Larimer County 2 years earlier. Rachel Doyle versus a man named Daniel Reyes, alleging fraud and misappropriation of engagement funds. Same face in the court filing photo. Different name entirely. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that filing for a long time. Derek Voss wasn't just hiding an old relationship. He was operating under more than one identity. And somewhere along the way, Rachel Doyle had learned enough to take him to court under a name that probably wasn't even his real one. I need her contact information. I told Sam, "Whatever you can find, without tripping any wires." "Give me until Friday," he said. That same afternoon, I got a call from the Vineyard venue in Boulder County. Their events coordinator said they'd found a sealed envelope in their lost and found from the night of the wedding, addressed simply to father of the bride. Nobody had thought to mention it until I called asking about unclaimed items. I drove out that same day to pick it up, and I sat in the venue parking lot holding an envelope that had been waiting for me for exactly 4 weeks. Inside the envelope was a single index card, handwritten in careful block letters, 7 words and a phone number. He did this to me too. "Call me." I sat in that parking lot and read it 4 times. She'd been at the wedding. She'd stood at the edge of the dance floor and watched Derek marry my daughter. And she'd still found the presence of mind to leave me a way in before she disappeared into the night. I didn't call the number right away. I needed to know more first, because a conversation like that only happens once, and I wanted to be ready for it. I spent the rest of that week building a file the way I used to build them for fraud cases at the bank. Every public record I could find on Derek Voss. Business filings for his advisory firm, incorporated only 2 years earlier, right around the time court records showed. Rachel Doyle's civil case against a man named Daniel Reyes. Social media that had been scrubbed clean sometime in the last 18 months. A LinkedIn profile with almost no history before that point. Like a man who'd learned the hard way to erase his own trail. Sam called on Friday with an address. Westminster, a northern suburb of Denver, less than 20 minutes from Emily's townhouse. Rachel Doyle had been living 20 minutes from my daughter this entire time, and neither of them had any idea. I called the number from the card that same evening, sitting in my truck outside a coffee shop on Colfax Avenue. It rang twice before a woman answered, her voice cautious, like she'd been waiting for this call and dreading it in equal measure. "I wasn't sure you'd actually call," she said once I told her my name. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I wanted to understand what I was looking at first." "That's fair," she said. "How much do you already know?" "Enough to know his name isn't just Derek Voss," I said. "Enough to know there was a court case with a different name attached to the same face. I'd like to hear the rest from you directly, if you're willing." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear traffic somewhere behind her voice, like she was standing outside rather than at home. "Can we meet in person?" she finally asked. "Somewhere neutral." We agreed to meet at a diner in Westminster the following Monday. I hung up and sat in my truck for a long time afterward, staring at the dashboard, thinking about Emily's face on her wedding day, and how completely unaware she still was that the man she married had already done all of this once before, possibly more than once, under a name that wasn't even his own. Rachel Doyle was younger than I expected, maybe 32, with the kind of composure that only comes from having survived, something exhausting and coming out the other side still standing. She brought a folder to the diner and set it on the table before she even sat down. Like she'd been waiting years for someone to finally ask, she laid it out over the better part of an hour. She'd met him 3 years earlier under the name Daniel Reyes, a supposed real estate investor working out of Fort Collins. Charming, attentive, exactly the kind of man who made her feel chosen. They got engaged within 8 months. He convinced her to combine finances ahead of the wedding, folding her savings into a joint investment account he managed personally, something he called smart consolidation. 2 weeks before their wedding date, he vanished. The account was emptied. The venue deposit gone. Even her engagement ring, it turned out, had been purchased on a credit line opened in her name without her knowledge. "I filed everything I could," she said. "Police report, civil suit, all of it." But he'd already changed his name by the time anyone tracked him down again, and proving it was the same man took me almost a year. "How did you find out about Emily?" I asked. Rachel slid a printout across the table. A photo pulled from a public engagement announcement online. "Derek Voss and Emily Callahan, dated 8 months ago. I have an alert set up," she said quietly, "for his face. I paid a service to scan public wedding and engagement photos for a facial match." I know how that sounds. "It doesn't sound crazy to me," I told her. "It sounds like someone who ran out of other options." She looked down at her folder. "I tried reaching your daughter directly first, through a message on social media. It never got a response. I think it went into a filtered inbox, unread. So I found the venue, and I came to the wedding myself, because I didn't know how else to warn a family who had no idea what was coming." I asked her the question that had been sitting in my chest since. "Marcus first showed me those photos. Is Daniel Reyes his real name, or is Derek Voss?" Rachel shook her head slowly. "Neither, probably. I found a third name buried in an old apartment lease from before I even knew him. I think he builds a new identity every time the old one gets too close to being caught." I sat there absorbing that, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I understood I wasn't dealing with one bad marriage decision. I was dealing with a man who had turned disappearing into a career, and my daughter's entire financial future was already sitting inside his hands. I drove home from that diner with Rachel's folder sitting on the passenger seat like it weighed more than it should. Diane was waiting up when I got back, and this time I didn't wait for her to ask. I sat down and told her everything, start to finish. Rachel Doyle, Daniel Reyes, the emptied account, the third name buried in an old lease. Diane went very still. Then she asked me the only question that mattered. "How much of our money has Emily already put in his hands?" I didn't know yet. That was the next thing I needed to find out. And I needed to find it out quietly, before Derek had any reason to suspect anyone was looking. The following week, I asked Emily to lunch, just the two of us, telling her I wanted to hear more about married life. She lit up the way she always does when she thinks someone's genuinely interested in her happiness, and over sandwiches she mentioned, almost in passing, that Derek had set up a joint trust account for them both, something he said would protect their future and simplify their taxes. She'd signed some paperwork a few weeks earlier. She didn't remember all the details. She trusted him with that part. I kept my face calm the way I'd trained myself to for 26 years, and asked which firm was managing the trust. She named it, a small outfit I'd never heard of, registered in Wyoming rather than Colorado, which told me more than she realized. That night I called Sam again. "Give me everything you can find on this trust firm," I told him. "Ownership, filing history, everything." He called back 2 days later, and what he found confirmed the worst version of what I'd been afraid of. The trust firm had been registered only 14 months earlier. Its sole listed officer was Patricia Voss. Derek's mother wasn't just attending these weddings. She was the one setting up the financial structures underneath them. I sat with that for a long time before I said anything to Diane. It meant this wasn't one man improvising a con on his own. It meant a mother and son had built a system together, refined it enough to survive a lawsuit in one state and simply relocate to the next, using new names and new brides each time, while the paperwork quietly funneled money somewhere neither bride nor family could easily trace. I need to know how many other Rachels there are, I told Sam, and I need to know exactly what's inside that trust before it finishes transferring anything. Sam went quiet on the line for a moment. Bob, he finally said, if this is as big as it's starting to look, you're going to need more than just me on this. He was right, and I already knew who I needed to call next. The next morning, I called an old friend, Ellen Marsh, a financial crimes attorney. I'd worked alongside during my last 6 years at the bank. Ellen had spent a decade prosecuting affinity fraud cases before going into private practice, and if anyone could tell me whether what I was looking at was actually criminal or just deeply unethical, it was her. I laid it all out on her office table. Rachel's folder, Sam's records on the Wyoming Trust, the civil case under the name Daniel Reyes. Ellen went quiet for a long time as she read through it. And when she finally looked up, her expression told me everything before she said a word. This isn't just fraud, Bob, she said. This is a pattern. A mother and son running a long-term scheme, using new identities to marry into money, then draining it through structures designed to look legitimate. If there are other victims, and I'd bet everything I own that there are, this becomes something federal agencies take seriously. She asked me the one question I'd been dreading. Has any money actually moved out of the trust yet? I didn't know, and that terrified me more than anything else so far. I called Sam that same afternoon and asked him to pull whatever filing history existed on the trust's transfer schedule. He came back within hours with the answer. The trust had an automatic disbursement clause. 60 days after the wedding date, a significant transfer would move from the joint account into a secondary account controlled by the Wyoming firm. Emily and Derek's wedding had been 53 days ago. We had exactly 7 days before whatever money Emily had signed over disappeared the same way it had for Rachel Doyle, and possibly for however many women had come before her. Ellen told me the smartest move wasn't to panic Emily or confront Derek directly yet. If we tipped him off too early, he'd simply vanish the way he apparently always did, taking whatever he could carry and leaving no trail behind. What we needed first was proof solid enough to freeze the transfer legally, and ideally, we needed other victims willing to come forward. Because one family's story is an accusation, multiple families with the same pattern is a case. That night, Rachel gave me something I hadn't expected. A name. A woman in Albuquerque she'd found through the same facial recognition. Alert service. Someone whose engagement announcement had appeared using yet another name for the same man, roughly a year and a half before he'd shown up as Derek Voss in Denver. I called her the next morning. Her name was Christine Ambrose, and when I told her why I was calling, she didn't sound surprised at all. She sounded like she'd been waiting for someone to finally call. Christine Ambrose told me her story over the phone in a voice that had clearly practiced, staying calm about it, the way people do once the raw grief turns into something more like armor. 2 years earlier, in Albuquerque, she'd been engaged to a man calling himself James Foster, a supposed logistics consultant with the same easy charm, the same attentiveness, the same instinct for making a woman feel like the only person in the room. He'd convinced her to open a joint investment account before the wedding, managed through a small trust firm she'd never heard of before or since. 6 weeks before the ceremony, he disappeared. The account was empty. So was her savings, which she'd foolishly linked to it for convenience. I filed a police report, she said. Nothing came of it. He'd used a fake identity even I couldn't fully verify at the time. I gave up trying to find him after about a year. I asked her the same question I'd asked Rachel. Do you remember a woman named Patricia, older, well-dressed, controlling in a way that felt maternal rather than romantic? Christine went quiet for a moment. There was a woman like that, she finally said. She came to one dinner with James early on, introduced as his aunt. I only met her once. She barely looked at me the whole night, but she watched every move he made like she was grading him. That was enough to confirm it for Ellen. 3 identities, 3 cities, 3 families, and one woman running the financial structure underneath all of it. Ellen told me this was no longer just a family matter I could handle quietly over dinner. This needed documentation built the way prosecutors build it. Victim statements, financial records, timeline correlation, everything organized before we moved a single step further. We had 6 days left before the trust's automatic transfer clause activated. Ellen filed an emergency request with a Colorado financial regulator to flag the Wyoming trust for review, using Rachel's existing civil judgment as the anchor that gave us legal standing to act quickly. It wasn't a criminal freeze yet, but it was enough to slow the machine down while we built the rest of the case. Meanwhile, I still hadn't told Emily any of it. Diane asked me every single day whether it was time yet, and every day I told her not yet, because the moment Emily knew, her face would change around Derek forever. Whether we managed to save her money or not, and I needed to be absolutely certain before I put that weight on her. Then, on the 5th day, Sam called with something that changed the shape of everything. Patricia Voss had just booked a flight to Denver. Patricia Voss booked a flight into Denver for the following Tuesday, and Sam found the booking through a routine records trace tied to her name on the trust filing. Ellen's read on it was simple. Either she was coming to check on her son's progress, the way a handler checks in on an asset, or something had already spooked her, and she was coming to help him move money faster than the 60-day clause allowed. Either way, we no longer had the luxury of waiting quietly. Ellen and I met that weekend to finalize what we had. Rachel's civil judgment, Christine's sworn statement, Sam's financial trail connecting 3 identities to the same Wyoming trust, a timeline showing 3 engagements, 3 drained accounts, and 1 recurring guest at each wedding who never signed her real name to anything. We requested and received an emergency administrative freeze on the trust's disbursement clause late Monday afternoon, just hours before Patricia's flight landed. It wasn't a full criminal filing yet, but it stopped the money from moving. And for the first time since Marcus Webb's phone call, I finally exhaled. I still hadn't told Emily. That changed Monday night, when Diane and I sat her down at our kitchen table and I laid out everything as gently as 26 years of delivering hard financial truths allowed me to. I showed her Rachel's photo from the reception. I showed her Christine's statement. I showed her the trust filing with Patricia's name listed as sole officer. Emily didn't cry the way I expected. She went very quiet. The way her mother does when something needs to be understood fully before it can be felt. Then she asked one question. Does he know yet that we know? Not yet, I told her. And that's exactly how we need to keep it for one more day. Emily surprised me then. She said she wanted to be the one to confront him, not me, not Ellen, her. She said if this was going to end, she wanted him to look her in the eye when it did, not receive a phone call from a lawyer while she sat somewhere else, protected from her own life. I didn't love the idea, but Ellen pointed out something I couldn't argue with. If Emily played it exactly as her old self, unaware and warm, one final dinner with Derek and his visiting mother, we might get something even better than a frozen trust. We might get them saying it out loud, in front of witnesses we controlled. Ellen arranged for a discreet recording device and a colleague seated 2 tables away. Diane wanted no part of the plan and made that clear. I told Emily I'd be in the parking lot the entire time, phone in hand, ready to walk in the second she needed me. Tuesday night, Emily sat down to dinner with Derek and Patricia Voss, and for the first time in this entire story, my daughter was the one holding the file. Emily sat across from Derek and Patricia at a quiet restaurant in Cherry Creek, ordered wine she didn't drink, and let the conversation drift the way it always had, warm, easy, unremarkable. Then, over the entree, she set a folder on the table the same way Rachel once had in a diner in Westminster. Derek's smile faltered first. Patricia's didn't move at all, which told Emily everything about who had really been in control the whole time. I found something strange in our trust paperwork, Emily said, keeping her voice steady. Rachel Doyle's photograph slid out first, then Christine Ambrose's statement. Then the Wyoming filing with Patricia's name listed as sole officer. Derek went very still. Patricia finally spoke, calling it a misunderstanding, an old business arrangement unrelated to the marriage. Emily didn't raise her voice. She simply asked one question. What's my husband's real name? Nobody answered her. That silence, recorded from 2 tables away, became the single most important piece of evidence Ellen used 2 weeks later, when the case moved from a quiet financial freeze into an active federal fraud investigation, with Rachel and Christine both stepping forward as formal complainants. Derek Voss, whose real name turned out to be Marcus Felden, was arrested in October. Patricia was named as a co-conspirator in a scheme investigators believe touched at least 5 families across 3 states. The frozen trust was returned to Emily in full, along with restitution proceedings that eventually helped Rachel and Christine recover a portion of what they'd lost years earlier. Emily filed for annulment within the month. She moved back home for a while, then found her own place in the spring, steadier than any of us expected her to be that fast. She still keeps Rachel's original index card in a drawer, the one that started all of it. She says it reminds her that a stranger's courage saved her, before her own family even knew there was anything to save her from. As for me, I finally slept properly again the night the transfer freeze went through. Diane still tells people her husband spent his whole career reading numbers, so that one week, when it mattered most, he could read a man instead and get there in time. That's the story of how one photograph, one careful phone call, and 3 women who refused to stay quiet took apart a con built to survive. Exactly this kind of scrutiny. If this story kept you hooked till the very end, that's exactly what we live for here at the Revenge Hub. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. There are plenty more stories like this one waiting for you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.